Is Liz Dunn. I'm the Safeguarding Learning Project Development Officer for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, which really means that I'm responsible for the multi-agency safeguarding training programme for the Safeguarding Children's Partnerships. Now, there's two partnerships across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. There's a Leicester Safeguarding Children Partnership Board, and then there's the Safeguarding Children Partnership of Leicestershire and Rutland, and you can see the two logos there. And I'm here this morning to launch our revised version of the Safeguarding Children Competency Framework. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But basically, it's a framework of what the Safeguarding Children's Partnerships want you to have as a sort of minimum safeguarding level, and I'll come on to how you use it, etc. as we go through this sort of hour. I'm not really sure how long this session will last. I've got certain things that I want to tell you, and you know, so when I've imparted all the information I have, that will be enough. I won't fill out the rest of the time if there's time left. And if you look at this revised framework, you'll see it was actually done in January 2022. And it was done by a group of us from different agencies, from districts, from early years, from within the local authority, within health as well, just to look at it and see what we thought should stay, how it should change, what people were saying. So we got some feedback about what people were saying, and so we've changed it accordingly. Okay, I'm just going to be muted. Lovely. So that's what's happened with this particular edition. We're only just launching it, and it's taken a little bit of time to get the space to launch it properly. We were going to do it just before the summer, and then things changed, so we decided to do it for the sort of autumn term. So this is the new Safeguarding Children Competency Framework. Now, some of you will know all about the Safeguarding Children Competency Framework. For some of you, it will be new. So I'm kind of going to go back to basics. In this session, I'm going to talk about why we have it, what it is, what are we doing with it, what's it there for. I'm going to talk about what's changed in it, what's different, what's new, different. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you evidence competencies, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the training that we provide. So, Working Together to Safeguard Children 2018. So this is a document that pulls together all the sort of laws and guidance and says, this is what we should do in our local areas to work together to safeguard children. So it kind of does exactly what it says on the tin. And in that document, it says, multi-agency training will be important in supporting this collective understanding of local need and the services available to support children and young people. So it's talking about what the needs are locally and what services we have to help meet that need in terms of our children and young people. Practitioners working in both universal services and specialist services, so it's thinking across that broad spectrum of services there are. So we have 4 tiers in our threshold document locally across in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and that goes from universal up to specialist with 2 other tiers in between of targeted services. And those services have a responsibility to identify the symptoms and triggers of abuse and neglect. So all of those services out there working with children have the responsibility to identify the symptoms and triggers of abuse and neglect, to share that information and provide children with the help they need. So that's everyone has that responsibility. To be effective, practitioners need to continue to develop their knowledge and skills in this area and be aware of the new emerging threats. So basically, you need to be up to date. You need to know what's happening in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. To enable this, the 3 safeguarding partners, so that doesn't mean Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, that means the local authorities, health and the police. They're the main safeguarding partners. So those three partners, along with other partners that they work with, but they're the three lead partners, equal lead partners, should consider what training is needed locally and how they will monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of any training they commission. That's kind of quite a big undertaking if you think of all the services that could possibly be working with children across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And we have two safeguarding partnerships across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So we have a Leicester partnership and we have a Leicestershire and Rutland partnership. But they all work together in terms of how they should think about what training is needed locally and how they'll monitor and evaluate it and commission training as well. So how are they going to do that? So the way we do that locally is that we have a multi-agency learning and development group. This group sits under the partners and reports back into the partners. And what it's responsible for, it has people from all the partners and from other significant agencies on the group who can provide information about the services they provide, that perhaps the training needs that they provide, the training needs they might have. And it works together to look at what training is needed locally. Now, it's not responsible for single agency training on safeguarding or any other topic. So if you're going into a job role, you're going to learn how to do your job, or you're going to be given an induction, you're going to be told what skills you need, or you're going to apply with those skills already. And then your agency has a responsibility to make sure that you've got your appropriate safeguarding training as well. So the multi-agency learning and development group isn't responsible for that single agency stuff. But what it does want to do is make sure that actually if you're giving your staff or your volunteers that you're working with some sort of level of training, we want to give you a way that you know what it is that's expected of you in terms of safeguarding. So that's what we want you to do. We want you to know what it is we want, if you like. And that's where the Safeguarding Children Competency Framework comes in. So sort of historically, what happened was the safeguarding partners delivered courses. They delivered courses at certain levels, and you had to come back and have that course every 2 or 3 years, depending on your role. So you just come and sort of have the same course so that you'd got that level of safeguarding. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. But what we're finding was that it's difficult to monitor. It's difficult to know who's had what. People were kind of coming saying, well, I know that already because I came like 2 years ago and it's the same course. So we're looking at a different way of delivering that as well, not just having repeat training in that same way. And so we created a while back, and it wasn't done by me, but it was created, the Safeguarding Children Competency Framework. And now we've revised this again in January 2022 that I'm sharing with you now. And it's for use by everyone who works or volunteers with children, young people and their families, or who is responsible for improving their outcomes. And that's a huge group of people. And it's also a bit confusing because, as you can see, it says it includes adult workforce practitioners who may be in a position to contribute to assessments of parenting capacity, staff that support a whole family approach, other individuals who offer a service within the community, i.e. housing, maintenance staff, receptionists of community centres, all those sorts of people. And actually, they're not getting a job that means they're working with children necessarily. They're getting a job that means they're a receptionist. They're really good at sorting out who can attend what at what time, meeting and greeting people. Their role is not necessarily safeguarding per se, but in that role they will potentially see children, and they need to be able to identify if they have any worries, so if they recognise any of the signs and indicators of abuse or neglect, and if they do recognise those signs and indicators, what do they do about it? So you can see it is quite a broad group of people. And there's other people as well. So there's other perhaps professional people who perhaps wouldn't need to use this Safeguarding Children competency framework. So social workers already have a career pathway, if you like, a framework that they work to, continuing professional development that we know about. And they wouldn't really need to do this Safeguarding Children competency framework because within their roles they already have that built in. Schools also work towards keeping children safe in education, so they already have a level of safeguarding that they have to deliver and has to be monitored, that we know about. Police too in their role, health too in their roles, they have a framework which we know fits in with the Safeguarding Children competency framework. So wouldn't need to do this on top. It's about making sure that you've got that level of safeguarding, and actually if you're following your own career path within your agency, potentially you have. This is more for people who say, well, actually I'm not really sure what my staff should know, because they've perhaps come across some children and young people, but actually it's not really their job, so I'm not really sure what it is that you want them to know. And to be honest, we really would quite like this to be a mandatory framework, but we can't make it mandatory because we can't really monitor it. And also, there's lots and lots of people who don't really need to do it, but there's lots and lots of people who do, and it would be really, really helpful for. So in terms of capacity, we can't make it mandatory. But I think if you keep in mind, you know, having safeguarding training and knowing how to respond in safeguarding situations is a responsibility. It's something mandatory. It's a duty that you have. Then, you know, thinking about how can I get the right safeguarding learning for my staff team or my volunteers is a really good. This is a really useful tool for you. So if we look at these two groups, if you like, so well, this big group of people, we've got a group who perhaps aren't part of the children's workforce per se, but they still need to know something about children's safeguarding. And this is kind of what's different in this framework. So before we had 10 core competencies that we expected everybody to do. And to be honest, the expectations then of those who weren't in the children's workforce was quite high of what they really needed to know. So we now have 5 core competencies for those people not in the children's workforce. So they only have to complete 5 core competencies around safeguarding, and I'm going to come on to what they are. But for those in the children's workforce, so those who do work and volunteer with children, and you would be classed in the children's workforce, there are 10 core competencies. So there's the 5 that everybody else has to do, plus 5. So there's 10 core competencies. So let's have a look at what they are. And what I'd say to you is, we're not trying to trick you. This is supposed to be a helpful resource that looks at what it is you need to know, and actually, if you can evidence that you know this information, that's all we're really asking of you, and that should be helpful for you in your role. So consider the daily lived experience of the child or young person and place them at the centre, listening to their voice, working out what they're trying to communicate and never losing sight of their needs. So this is that kind of classic, the voice of the child. We don't just say voice because there's lots of children who perhaps can't communicate through language, perhaps they're too young, too little, perhaps they have a disability, perhaps they don't speak English as their first language, or don't speak English very well. So we need to it's not just what children say to us, it's how they behave around. They might be trying to tell us something by how they're behaving, but also what we know about children is that they sometimes tell us what they think we want to hear. So if we're worried about them, then we need to kind of perhaps ask a little bit more to kind of pick out what it is that why we're feeling worried, and perhaps what it is they're trying to tell us. So that's competence number 1. Think about the child. So if there's a child there, think about what their life might be like. And of course, you might only see them for a snapshot, but if you're seeing them in a reception being dragged in and they've clearly distressed and they've perhaps got bruising, you know, what is it that's making you concerned? Are you reassured by the responses you're getting from the parent and the child? Consider that daily lived experience. Know how to recognise the possible signs and indicators of abuse and neglect. So what we know is that sometimes people don't worry about our children and don't worry about abuse and neglect because they don't know what the signs and indicators are. And also, they don't want to think the unthinkable. So sometimes where there are signs and indicators, we explain them away because we don't actually like to think people are trying to hurt children. And most people aren't trying to hurt children, but we need to be able to recognise when we're worried about things and what those signs and indicators of abuse and neglect are. So that's something that we do want people to know. So then, if you get some information, that's important information, what should you do with it? How should you record it? How should you share it? Who should you share it with? And you also need to think that if you do see something you worry about, if you're sharing information about a child, that information could be used in a legal capacity. So it could be used in an assessment, it could be shared with the individuals if that referral moves forward, if we do find out that there are worries about children, young people. So, you know, we can't be sort of judgmental in it or subjective. We have to be really objective in how we share information. This has happened. This child has a bruise. The child said that their mum hit them. So this is, you know, not that you thought the mum was a bit shady, you never really liked her, she always seemed strange. None of those things. This evidence, because it could be used in the assessment, which I think kind of scares people. But if we stick to facts, then we're okay. And objective information, not that sort of subjective response. And then understand the importance of sharing that information. Because sometimes we're not really sure, perhaps the child's lying, or actually, you know, the family, you think they're really nice. You don't think they'd actually do that. You wouldn't do that. So why would anybody do that? So sort of 3 and 4 are quite similar. It's about getting that information and then knowing how to share it, who with, and not being too worried about sharing that information, because in terms of safeguarding, there aren't really any barriers to sharing that information. We just have to share appropriately, so we share the right amount of information with the right people. So that's the kind of guidance around that. And that information sharing advice is a government document which is really, really useful. I think it's about 6 pages long, 6 sides, really easy to use. So a really good document to have to hand, really. And then be persistent in your response to safeguarding needs. Notice, check and share, and apply professional curiosity. Follow up with inquiries, escalate where necessary, and whistleblow as required. And you might think, well, that seems like quite a big one for somebody who might not even be working in the children's workforce. But sometimes it's those people who aren't working in the children's workforce who see things that other people don't see. Because quite often when you've got people who are working in a children's workforce, if you're going to abuse a child, you're going to have your barriers up, your guards up when you meet people who you know might be watching your behaviour. But if you've got someone from housing popping around, you might not be so, housing is an example, you might not be so worried about what they might see because you don't see them as part of the children's workforce and they're coming to talk to you about housing, for example. So if you think that people are saying, oh, well, that we've never seen that, or actually we're not that worried about that, but you know that's really unusual, that's not what you see in every other person's house, this is something quite unique and unusual, then you should be persistent. So you need to, if you share that information perhaps with your designated lead, you need to make sure that they've shared it on if that's what you think should happen. And also, if you don't hear anything back, if a referral is made, you can check what's happened to that referral, and you can escalate it as necessary and whistleblow as required, which again is a really difficult thing to do. But when we're talking about children's safeguarding, it is so important. Okay, so then we've got So they're the 5 for people who don't work in the children's workforce, but they're also the first 5 for people that do. And then we have ones that we expect people within the children's workforce to know. So, and this will be part of your job. Know how to respond and communicate with children, young people or adults when they're maybe trying to tell you something. This could be verbally, non-verbally, or through their behaviour. So you may think that's like number 1, and it is quite like number 1, except number 1 is saying, listen and take on board what they're saying. This is saying, actually, you may be able to have that conversation that opens up what they're trying to tell you, because that's your skill, that's your role as somebody in the children's workforce. We want you to understand what might make some children more vulnerable, taking into account diversity and difference and promoting equality and inclusion. So I just heard on the television this morning that there's a report that says that Black and Bangladeshi children are more likely to be suffering from food poverty. Statistically, some research has been done. So that might be something that you think about in your role as children that might be more vulnerable. But we also have statistics about children that are more vulnerable generally in terms of safeguarding. And you can learn about that, or you can know about that, or that's something that we want you to know. We want you to have a knowledge of safeguarding legislation, statutory and non-statutory guidance, as well as the other people around you. So safeguarding bodies, so the Safeguarding Children's Partnerships, what does that do sort of broadly, because that is relevant to everyone's role, but also people who you work with, what do they do? If you make a referral into an agency, what does that agency actually do? So we want you to know where you fit in the broader safeguarding picture. Even if your role isn't safeguarding, it's working with children, how do you still fit into that role? Understanding and awareness of the ages and stages of child development, including those children with special educational needs and disability, to identify and acknowledge changes in behaviour as a possible indicator of abuse. So you need to understand about child development when you're working in the children's workforce. What is typical for a child that you work with? If you're working with teenagers, what is typical for that child? If that child has a disability, what is typical for a child functioning at the age of 8, and what isn't, so that you can make that professional judgment about whether you're concerned about them. And understand that safeguarding requires work effectively across teams, different agencies and professions, as well as with children, young people and families themselves. So this isn't I'm worried about something, I'm going to tell social care and they're going to sort it out. This is, I'm worried about something, how can we work effectively with other people? Do I need to report this on? I need to tell, who do I need to tell? Who do we need to share this with? What else do we need to find out? Because not one agency can solve an issue for any child or family. It takes, where there are safeguarding concerns, take us all to work together, because safeguarding is everybody's business, and I'm sure you've heard that. And then we have an additional 11 to 34 competencies. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of those. You don't have to meet all of the 11 to 34 competencies. You just have to meet the 10, and then you select competencies according to your role. So if you're a manager, there's competencies that are suitable or appropriate to management, and I've selected. So if you're someone who makes a referral, this is a competence that you might want to think about. What do you do if your referral is not accepted? So you need to know what you do, and you need to understand what the threshold for access to services document says. And again, that link is in there for you if you're not sure what that is. But I mean, that's fundamental to making a referral, is you need to know about the thresholds. You need to know how to contribute to assessments of children, young people and or parents, carers. So how do you, if you're part of this safeguarding worry and it's gone to an assessment, how can you contribute? What is it that you need to say? So if you're involved in meetings or somebody comes to talk to you, you talk about what you're concerned about, why that's different. So how do you contribute? And then for people perhaps higher up or in different roles, ability to give effective feedback and offer professional challenge to colleagues across agencies or those you're advising. So this is perhaps people in an advisory role, it might be people who are chairs of groups, it might be people who are involved, but at a level where they need to say, actually, that's not appropriate in this particular case, because that's not typical for children, and this is why we're worried about it. So that's another example. And then this one is perhaps more for strategic leaders, leading the development of effective policy and procedures for safeguarding children in their organisation. So this is someone who's sitting quite high up in their organisation who needs to think about how you're going to ensure that your staff can safeguard children in their organisation. So there's 11 to 34, so there's 34 competencies in all. If you work in the children's workforce, you have to do 10 as a minimum. You'll probably do more. If you're a frontline worker, you may only just do the 10, and that's okay. And we're not saying you've got to pick out some more. You've only if they're relevant to somebody's role. And then if you don't work in the children's workforce, you need to be doing the first 5. Also, what's different in this revised version of the competency framework is that there's no suggested groups. So in the last document, we had suggested groups. So we said, here's frontline workers. If you're a frontline worker, you should do additional competencies. If you're a designated safeguarding lead or a professional advisor, we think you should do these additional competencies. If you're a specialist frontline practitioner, we think you should do these, etc., etc. The feedback we got was that confused people because they might be a DSL and a manager or a supervisor, and so they weren't sure which sort of group they should go into, and so we didn't want to confuse the issue by having groups. So what we've done instead is we haven't got any groups, so it's kind of free. It's a free for all, and you know, it'd be useful and probably quite interesting to get some feedback on what people think about that. But it's to try to reduce confusion, not increase confusion. So that's something that's new in this particular document as well. Because what we want you to do is follow this 5-step process. We want you to read it. Please read the competency framework document. Then look through it. What competencies reflect the role, responsibilities and duties of the individual? So if you're a manager and you're talking to a member of staff, what do you think they should know? A manager or individual is able to select any competencies additional to the core competencies that are relevant to role. So you can add as many or as few as you like, but they're relevant to role. We don't need you to be doing stuff that's outside of your role. Then, and this can be quite difficult, plan for appropriate learning opportunities to be identified and accessed or provided. So if you're thinking that this person needs this, how are they going to get this? Maybe it's your whole team that needs this. It might be a different way of getting it then. It might be that you invite somebody into your setting or agency to deliver something on that. Okay, the manager and worker provide the evidence and record that the competencies have been achieved. Evidence that's recorded must refer to a learning activity that has taken place in the last 12 months. So we want it to be quite fresh. And then an update and refresh. Competencies should be completed with staff at a minimum of every 3 years. But what we'd say is, actually, it's easy to have this part of your yearly appraisal of staff. Most agencies have yearly appraisals. A lot of agencies have more regular sort of oversight or supervision or one-to-one. Some don't, but some do. Some have team meetings, and you can look at this document within those situations if that helps you, you know, to make sure that your staff are kept up to date with safeguarding. Perhaps you'll have a twice a year team meeting on safeguarding, and that could help to meet these competencies. So we'd like to keep it quite current. We don't want it to be something that's just sort of stuffed away. So, you know, so it can be part of a training record as well. But this is important. The content of learning opportunities should be proportionate to the individual's roles and responsibilities in order that it is relevant and meaningful. So we don't need you to be able to repeat verbatim Working Together to Safeguard Children 2018, but we might need you to be able to know where to go to find it, for example. So, you know, if I was asked to fold up paper to make something interesting, this is probably what I would do. That's my level of ability in folding paper. I would make a paper plane. If I was in a different role, so even a role perhaps in a hotel, you know, sort of where you make fancy images from towels, I might need a little bit more skill in folding paper. So I might need to learn a little bit more about how I could make something a little bit more fancy than my paper plane, which looks a little bit poor next to that, you have to admit. But if I was actually a specialist in origami, so if I'm a child protection specialist, I need to know a lot more detail, don't I? I need to know how to fold paper to make this beautiful swan. And so that's what we're saying. If you're a worker who actually doesn't work in the children's workforce, you just need to know what to do if you're worried about someone. If you need to know what the signs and indicators of abuse and neglect are, and then what do you do with that information. But if you're in child protection, if you're at that high end working in child protection, you need to know a lot more detail. You need to know who it is that information is passed to, what meetings, who should be there. You're perhaps even setting up those meetings, inviting people. So that's what we mean by proportionate. It should be proportionate to your role. If you're in an early help sort of agency, of which there are many, again, it's probably about who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to refer to? Who should I share this information with? Okay, so it's proportionate. So we don't want everybody to know everything about everything, but knowing where to find out information is really, really useful. Okay, so how are we going to meet them? And what we wanted to do with the framework originally in its first inception was that we don't necessarily want people to just come and do training, the same training every 2 or 3 years. The competency framework acknowledges that in addition to traditional training events, there are different ways of learning and developing. So you don't just learn from going to training. In fact, we know that people can sit in training for, I don't know, a day and come out and not do anything that they've learned. So it's not always the best way of gaining information or finding out new skills. There are different ways. So whilst training activities help to provide the knowledge and skills that contribute to staff being able to meet their competencies, attending a training course does not automatically mean that they have the competencies will have been met. So discussion and verification after the event may be required. And really that is what should be happening when people go to training. And I fear that it isn't happening often enough. So you send a member of your staff team goes to training, they come back, you should be asking them about it. What did you learn? How do you think that's useful in this setting? And you know, they might say, well, I don't think it is. But you know, we need to understand what it is they've learned from that training. And actually, I want feedback. If people say, well, actually, nothing about what I've learned on something that I went to on a Safeguarding Children's Partnership multi-agency training program, that's not relevant to me. I'd quite like to know that, because then we can target it or not do it, or you know, whatever's relevant. So just sitting in training doesn't mean that you've had that knowledge imparted. I once remember one of my managers saying I'd got a load of books. I was doing a course. I got a load of books, and he said to me, he said, you do know you've got to open those books. You know, so we've got to open and read and digest and take on that information. Just having the books, carrying them around doesn't actually help. I did feel quite proud at that time, quite smug that I'd got all these books, but he was right. I had to read them. I had to look at them. So what are other ways we can meet competencies? So talk courses, training, conferences, briefings. That can be multi-agency, within house. So that's a way of learning. Practice-based workshops. So that might be something where you look at a certain area of work in your team. E-learning and workbooks. Workbooks aren't so fashionable now, but actually I used to quite like them, because you do a bit of learning and then you kind of answer some questions and you've got all that information there. But sometimes for qualifications, I think level 2 and level 3 quite often have workbooks, probably e-workbooks now, but yeah, they can be quite good. Personal research, you know, how do you find out about things? If I get some information, I go and read it. You know, I search for it, and I find the articles, or I find information, or I find the original report, and I try to read it. Sometimes it's better not to read the original report because it can be quite difficult to read. So reading some commentary on the report can be quite helpful. So personal research can be really useful. Self-directed learning and distance learning. These are all different ways of learning. Mentoring and shadowing is a really good way of learning. How does that process work? Come along with me and I'll show you. You can see how that works. Reflective supervision. So I know not everybody has supervision, but where you do have meetings with your manager or your supervisor, and you can spend that time thinking about why you did what you did, why that happened, how you could perhaps stop that from happening again, or why you might want that to happen next time, or how you can make it better next time. Thinking about all of those things. How did that make you feel? Because a lot of safeguarding is about how we feel. You know, that's why it's so difficult to kind of apply sort of safeguarding rules, because it's how we feel, it's what we think, what that makes us want to do. So reflective supervision can be great, and then you can evidence that then in your competencies. Safeguarding children partnerships and safeguarding adults briefings. So we deliver briefings. We deliver them face to face. We deliver them online. There's a reader's a digest that goes out with information from the safeguarding children's and adult partners. The safeguarding matters. We do 7-minute briefings. We're doing safeguarding matters live now online. So there's lots of different variations there. And also when there's learning from child safeguarding practice reviews, safeguarding adults reviews and domestic homicide reviews, you can use that information as well. So sometimes we do specific briefings about learning from different reviews. Again, we have 7-minute briefings on learning from different reviews. And what you can do is you can take some of that information, perhaps a 7-minute briefing, into your team meeting and say, okay, what do we think about this? How are we part of this? What would we have done in this situation? Why do we think this worked? Why do we think this didn't work? So you can have some of those discussions. It might be that you're getting some formal education. You might be following a qualification pathway. That's all relevant. You know, it's not just because it's from a different providers. It's all relevant to safeguarding. We don't have the monopoly on safeguarding training. You can get it from anywhere really. And peer reviews. So talking to your colleagues, doing something with your colleagues, your peers, or case conferences. So if you're involved in things like that, that can help. And then previous knowledge, so prior learning. So if you can evidence that you're going to use that prior learning in your role and how, then that can help to meet a competency too. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show a very, very tiny clip of film. And if you can't hear it, please let me know. And this is about a situation where a worker went out. She says she's from the council. It's Haringey Council. So they'd have different roles to perhaps what we would have. But she goes out and comes across a situation, and then she responds to this situation. I hope this is going to play. So just getting it to the point. You can see this is quite a long film. But I'm only going to play part of it.
I went out on a home visit one day, myself and a colleague, to talk to the tenant about rent arrears and their benefits. And on getting there, knocked on the door. Child answered the door from the inside, didn't open the door, and asked who it was. I said, I was from the council, needed to speak to the mother. He said, well, my mum's not here. And I instantly realised, okay, this child I was talking to couldn't have been more than 5-6 years old, chatting with us very freely through the letterbox. At first he said she'd popped out to the shops, and then we said, okay, we'll wait until she came back. Half an hour later, she still wasn't back. At this point, we started to get a bit concerned. When I realised that the child was on their own, I was anxious, worried. The neighbour confirmed that the parent, they were a single mother, often left the child to go to work, so she would leave the child on their own. I had to contact my manager, who then contacted social services, but yes, social services came in and took over the situation. It could have happened on a different occasion where the child could have come to harm, because anything could happen. That is neglect.
Okay, so that's a very small clip of film from, there's actually 5 films in that set of Haringey films, and I think we're looking at using some of them in Leicestershire as well, but they're really good films, and they cross children's and adults safeguarding. So again, that's something you could use in your group, your team, your agency, to talk about safeguarding. So this is someone who's gone out to talk about benefits. So they're not from the children's workforce, so they would have to, in Leicestershire and Rutland, they would have to complete the first 5 competencies, and just that small episode could help to evidence the first 5 competencies. So if you look at what I've put here, in terms of the daily lived experience, she listened to the child. She understood that it isn't appropriate for a child to be home alone at that age. So she said it couldn't be more than 5 or 6. So she didn't know really how old that child was. So in terms of recognising possible signs and indicators of abuse and neglect, she understood that leaving a child of that age at home alone is an indicator of neglect. Anything could have happened. They could have been harmed. They could have tried to, get a drink or something, and lots of things could have gone wrong. So they knew that. So they recognised the sign of indicator of abuse. So what did they do with the information? They actually gained a bit more information, didn't they? The neighbour said that the child's quite often left on their own. So they then shared that information appropriately, because they rang their manager to say that, they were worried, the child was alone, they'd been alone for a period of time. And so they did what they should have done. I don't know if they knew this, but I put in here that this information could be used in an assessment, because you can see how that could be used in an assessment. Because if you're going out to speak to the mum to assess the situation, you're saying, actually, we know this child was left alone. Our worker was there. They waited for over half an hour, and that's good evidence for an assessment about children being left. Also, the information from the neighbour would be helpful. In terms of the importance of sharing the information, she knew it was appropriate to share that information with the manager, and she wanted that manager to share that forward to social care, and that was the right thing to do in this situation. So even though, there might be lots of reasons why the mum, who's a single mum, had to do that or felt she had to do that, but actually the child was at risk, so they had to share the information. And there was some persistency there, because she didn't just accept that the mum wasn't there and walked away. She listened to what the child said. She waited for a while, because if the mum was at the shops, then that might have been a reasonable amount of time. She gained further information from the manager and rang the manager. So she was persistent, and she knew that the manager had passed that on to social care. So she was persistent in her response to safeguarding. So you can see that just that episode could really help meet competency, the competency framework, or the competencies that you need. Now, of course, we can't set that up for everybody, but even having a discussion about that could be useful in your team to help so as long as your team know how to respond, or what would they do in that situation. Other competencies that this situation could have evidenced could have been knowing how to respond and communicate with children, because she spent a little time talking to the child, checking out, and mum was going to be back. Okay, didn't take that as gospel, sort of thought, well, how long have you been there? So understanding that safeguarding requires working effectively across teams. So she knew that actually it wasn't her role really to do anything about this child except to report that information, and then social services would help. And so she knew that. And then knowing how to assess risk, need, and to follow procedures, pathways to engage with appropriate services. She evidenced that as well in that, just in that small situation that happened there. So what I'm saying is, it shouldn't, and I know that, you know, you can't set that up, but you can have discussions around what you would do in those situations. Scenario discussions are really good to help people to say what they might do, and also to think about why they might not do it. What would they be worried about? Because that's always good to break that down and reassure people that they're doing the right thing. Other ways, so I just wanted to think about other ways to evidence competence, and I've just selected a few. So understand what to do if your referral is not accepted, and have knowledge of the thresholds for access to services. So how can you meet this competency? So you can read the threshold for access to service and show that you know how to use that document. You can understand the escalation procedure, because if you have got a concern that you're not being heard, for example, or that things aren't being progressed appropriately, you can use the escalation procedure. If you attended the MARF, how to work together to achieve an effective referral, that covers both of those documents, and it helps you to think about how to use the threshold document. Again, you might sit through that training and not take on anything, so it'd be up to your manager to say, so okay, what did you learn? What do you know now? How do you think that has been valuable to you in terms of knowing the threshold and how to make a referral? It might be peer group discussions. It might be someone else, another designated safeguarding lead, a safeguarding officer in another adjacent agency says, you know, I've had problems with this, what do you think? And you have that discussion. Or it could be sector forums. So you might have perhaps an early years forum where you talk about, you know, how to make referrals, or why you think referrals aren't being accepted, or, you know, those sorts of conversations. To help you to meet that competency. Sorry, this is a little bit faint. I hope you can see it okay. So another one is ensure staff have appropriate understanding, knowledge and skills in relation to safeguarding and child protection according to their role, and can act and escalate concerns. So you're in charge now of making sure your staff has got appropriate understanding. So you've got to have a safeguarding policy and procedure. You've got to make sure you've got that, and that staff read it as well. So it'd be part of their induction, I assume, to look at the safeguarding policy and know what to do. You might have a programme of training around your staff around safeguarding. It could be a team meeting. It could be every half a year we have a team meeting on safeguarding. You might have individual training records for staff to know what training they've achieved, what stage they're at. You could have their competency framework document in that folder as well, so that you know. And like I've already mentioned, service and team meetings. I've sort of said that several times. Recognising the role of other agencies and their limitations as well as your own. That's in there because we quite often find when we do child safeguarding practice reviews that people have made a referral into perhaps an agency and have assumed, therefore, that certain work is being done because they don't understand the limitations of that service. So for some services, if the child doesn't want that service or won't go to a meeting, they're not going to pursue that because that's not their role. The child has to come there willingly. So just because you've referred in doesn't mean they're getting the help from that service. So this is really, really important in terms of safeguarding and working together. So and how do you do that? How do you meet that competency? So it's about research and building strong professional networks with people that you work with commonly or regularly. You might attend appropriate training or awareness raising events. So quite often different agencies will have, you know, this is what we do sort of sessions. You might want to invite somebody in from a relevant agency, say actually this is what this agency does, this is how you refer into it, but they don't do this. So understanding what's happening and helping your service or your staff to do that as well. And then just another one, ability to work with children and families where there are safeguarding or child protection concerns as part of a multidisciplinary team when assessing a child. So this is where we're working together to actually try and safeguard and protect children. We have to work with other people, have to work with other agencies. We're part of a multidisciplinary team. And that could be you've qualified, you've done previous learning, you've done a qualification that actually supports that competency. It might be mentoring. It might be that this is the first time you've been involved in something like this, or you're shadowing, or you're being mentored by somebody. It could be that you're providing mentoring to someone else. That would demonstrate that you know what you're doing. You could be a mentor for somebody else. Or demonstrated through your role. So it might be that you've attended that and you're discussing, you're having that reflective supervision, and you're discussing how that particular child protection multidisciplinary team meeting went, how it made you feel, what you thought your role was, how you thought you delivered your role, whether you think there's something you could do better next time. All of those things would help to meet that competency. Okay, so I've talked about what the competency framework is. I've talked about how you can meet competencies. I've talked about what's different. And now I'm kind of going to backtrack a little bit, because to support you to meet some of these competencies, yes, there are all of these things here. Yes, there's the list I went through, but we do offer training as part of the multi-agency Safeguarding Children training programme. There's a broad range of training that we offer. So here's some of the planned training. I think that core awareness is actually full, but there's other core awareness on our programme. So it's the same course, it's repeated. So you see what I'm saying now. We don't want you to do repeated courses, but here's a course that can help you to meet your core competencies, and it would be 1 to 10 that you could come along to. So if you only needed to meet 1 to 5, you could still come along. You get a little bit more information than you perhaps needed. We are looking at how we can do, ideally we'd like e-learning to meet the first 5 competencies, but we don't have an e-learning platform at the moment. So we're looking at ways that we can perhaps deliver that those 5 competencies differently that can support people. We've got the MARF working together to achieve an effective referral event. That is again repeated quite regularly to allow people to have an opportunity to go on that. We regularly have designated safeguarding lead training. So this isn't training that would be appropriate for schools. So the safeguarding in education teams provide safeguarding lead training for schools, but this is for everybody else. Everybody else who's not in schools, who is a designated safeguarding lead or a designated safeguarding officer. So they're the lead for safeguarding in their agency. You can see 2 different events there that we've got coming up. But we do sessions around specific things as well. So we have topics that we cover, and actually, you know, if you've been on the core awareness and you know what I'm going to say on that, or whoever's delivering it's going to say, you might want to come on something else. And fabricated or induced illness, this is about a different way of working. So we have a new way of responding to fabricated or induced illness, so you can come along and learn about that. We have safeguarding disabled children. This is a face-to-face event, looking at some of the complexities around this more vulnerable group of children. So they are more vulnerable, usually because of their situation. So let's have a look and discuss how we can work with children who have a disability. The ICON message. So ICON is an approach to coping with crying for newborn babies. So for parents, babies cry. They are supposed to cry, but sometimes that can be difficult to cope with, or you may not be able to comfort them. And it's an approach that we have across LLR and other areas of the country, but it is an approach we have at LLR. And if you want to know more about that, then come along to the information session. We have a multi-agency TAF meeting, so team around the family. So lots of people who are in early help type services may be involved in team around the family meetings before we kind of get into the more statutory child in need, child protection situation. How can we help this family? How can we support this child? What do they need? What are the things that we can do? We've got a conference event coming up. That's the 14th of November. doesn't say the date there, but if you click onto it, it's a morning or an afternoon session talking about the missing from home joint protocol, and looking at some of the issues around for our teenagers who may be in care. So that's all coming up. So you can see there's lots of events. But if you click on this link, the LLR Safeguarding Children Partnership Events, that's an Eventbrite page. If you click on that and scroll down, all of our, so in the scrolling down, there's lots of information about who that training's for, why it's provided. If you scroll down, you can see at the bottom, there's all of our events that are coming up, that are planned, that we're trying to get people to, well, we'd like people to book onto. But what I'd say to you is, don't book onto it and not come. We have lots and lots of conversations at the moment about charging for our training, which we only want to do because people don't turn up for training. So what we'd really like to do is to charge you if you don't turn up, but that's very, very complicated to do that. So we may have to go to a point where we charge a minimal amount for our training, but it's because people don't turn up. It's because we have 30 people booked on and only 20 turned up, and we're paying that trainer then to deliver to 20 people, not 30 people. So if you book on and then you can't come, we know that sometimes you book on and you can't come. Of course we know. If you let us know, that's really, really helpful. Ideally by cancelling the Eventbrite place, but if you can't do that, just let us know. That's really helpful. You can also find out about what we're doing on Twitter, and I hope I've put the right Twitter thing there, and Derry will tell me if I'm wrong anyway. And then a couple of save the dates. I'm going to do some sessions on how to much more in depth on how to use the Safeguarding Children Competency Framework. So this is probably for sort of managers, leaders, to look at how they work with their teams to provide appropriate safeguarding learning, how they'd use the framework, what sort of events they could put on. Events makes it sound so things they could do. What can they do? What team meetings should they have? How should they meet the competencies within their teams? Perhaps even what competencies should they be selecting? So we'll have a look at some of those more in-depth things, and I'm going to try and get a room to do this face-to-face. So that's why they're not actually on our programme yet, but they're 2 dates, the 9th of November and the 1st of December. Where I perhaps try and get a room in the city and a room in the county. Doesn't mean you can't come to the one that's in the county if you work in the city, or vice versa, but it's just to kind of get a broader sort of, you know, range of people that can come. I could even go to Rutland if they could host me, but also I might do one online, so I'd be interested to know if people would prefer or would like an online one. I know it's a lot more accessible for people to do training online. So if you would like an online session, if you just pop that in the chat, that'd be really helpful. And I've left it till last, and I did that deliberately because I didn't want you to kind of just be looking at the safeguarding framework while I was talking, but this is where you can find it. So the top LSCPB home, that's actually the City Safeguarding Children Partnership Board website, and then the link below is to get you straight to the Safeguarding Children's Competency Framework. But I've given you the link to the website because you really should be going on the websites as well. There's lots of information on the websites, not just about training, but about safeguarding topics, issues, about processes. The Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland procedures can be accessed via both websites through a button. They're the same procedures. So if you went on the Leicestershire and Rutland Safeguarding Partnership Business website homepage, there's a button that says procedures, and there's one on the city one as well. And if you click on either of those, you go straight through to the same procedures. And what we know is that people don't really read these procedures, they don't refer to them like we want them to. So that's why I've given you that link, because we want you to refer to them. So if you've just heard that I'm saying there's a new way of working with fabricated and induced illness, and you think, I can't go to that event, how can I find out about it? Go onto the procedures and read the FII procedure, because it's really self-explanatory. Most of the procedures are really accessible and really self-explanatory, and if they're not, tell us, because we update the procedures regularly, and we want you to be able to use them. So if you can't for whatever reason, then we'd like to know that, because that's really helpful. And then so we've got the city at the top, and it's the same, the county at the bottom. The top one's the home page, and the one underneath is how you access the competency framework. Okay, so I have careered through my slides, and what I'd like to know now is, are there any questions? Is there anything you want to ask me about this? Is there anything you want to know? If there's something you want to know but you don't want to ask me now, there's the LSCP training at leicester.gov.uk that you can email and ask a question.